Jennifer Byrne, and it's great to have you back with us for Book Club. And this week's new release, well, look, 2 words. Iceberg, ship. You know where we're heading. A new look at that old and most famous maritime disaster, the sinking of the Titanic, David Dyer's The Midnight Watch. And for our favourite, allow me to introduce a newcomer to the club, writer and anti-cool girl, which is the name of her memoir, Rosie Waterland, who has chosen as her favourite...
Oh, I've chosen A Million Little Pieces by James Fry.
And have you noticed how very much, I don't know, I hope you all saw last week's show, but how much like dust it looks? How much like the cover of it.
Yeah. Oh, you're cruel. You're very cruel.
Of course I'm cruel, that's my job. And a warm welcome home to Jason Marique and our rap man writer, Omar Musa. Welcome home. Thank you. So, a quick look at book world news. And new releases include Vinegar Girl by Pulitzer Prize winner Ann Tyler, while closer to home, debuts from Rajith Savannadasa and Zoe Morrison, plus new works from Zane Lovett and Liam Pieper. And I am now handing the reins, such as they are, over to you, Jason, to share some of your news, because you've been doing awards business.
Yes, that's right. The Victorian Premier's Award for an Unpublished Manuscript was awarded this week, or last week, in fact. And it went to a woman called Melanie Cheng for a collection of short stories called Australia Day. This is the award that has launched so many brilliant careers, going from... The inaugural winner was Carrie Tiffany. The big poster boy would be Graham Simpson. He won it for the Rosie Project in 2012. That only sold 3 million plus copies. So clearly there's a big future for Melanie Cheng.
You've been at the Emerging Writers Festival. Tell us about that.
It's a really exciting time of year because I think it's always a good thing in Australia when we provide safe spaces for dangerous, reckless thought. And, you know, it's an exciting time for young Australian writers at the moment. There are more writers of colour, people of diverse sexual orientations telling their stories. And I think the exciting thing about Australian literature right now, in a way, is that so many of the great stories are yet to be written. So we need to foster and nurture our emerging writers as they come out like ferocious little butterflies from their literary chrysalises.
May I say, you're an excellent ambassador. That made me really interested. That was a really good sell.
You should have a sceptre.
Well, a speaker's staff.
Yes. Now to our new release, a novel based firmly on fact by Australia's David Dyer called The Midnight Watch. On April the 14th, 1912, while steaming across the Atlantic, the Titanic slams into an iceberg. It sends up distress flares, witnessed by an officer on the midnight watch of the nearby SS California. The craft just sits tight as the Titanic sinks. How could that happen? How could experienced officers stand by while 1,500 people freeze and drown? That is David Dyer's story. How indeed. It's an extraordinary story. What did you think, Marique, of the book?
I thought it was good. I felt I was tricked into learning something through enjoying literature. I suspect a trap.
An informative book.
Look, it is one of those, you know, how many more stories can we hear about the Titanic? And it sinks, but it was a completely new story. I know, spoiler, sorry. Completely new take on it, a story that I had never heard of, that of course I finished the book and immediately raced out to read more about, which I think is a great sign as well. I think the historical stuff was very successful, that story. I think it was less successful in other areas, which we can discuss later.
I'm going to go straight to you, Rosie, because you, we didn't know this when we picked the book, but you're a Titanic nut.
Oh, and a Titanorac, we call ourselves.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm a Titanorac.
That's amazing.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it's it's our name. It's our tribe. It's our people.
And have you always been like this?
Yes. My dad used to tell me stories about it when I was young, and then the film came out, obviously, and I used to fast forward through the boring Jack and Rose bits just to like pause on the engine room. Like that's what true Titanoracks do.
Well, this is the book for you. What I wanted to know,
Yes.
you of all people would know.
I knew about the Californian.
You did?
So, and it's to a Titanorack, this story is old news. And David Dyer's a Titanorack, obviously, so he knew about it. But people who aren't major fans didn't know that there was a ship just a few miles away that could have come and saved everyone on board. So I think it is a fascinating read for people who didn't realise. I agree with you, the historic stuff is very satisfying, and he clearly knows his stuff. I mean, there's quotes in there that he's pulled exactly from court transcripts. It's very historically accurate, but then there are other parts of the book that...
It's weird, like having a sleuth on the show. That came from it. Had you ever heard of such a story?
No, I hadn't. But I found it to be quite an involving book, actually. I thought some of the writing was a little bit workmanlike. And then it sort of trod over the same ground again and again. 50 pages in, you already kind of know what's happened, what the dilemma is, and then it kind of reiterates it many, many times during the book. But what I did like were the court scenes where you suddenly realise that, OK, this mistake that these people have made, whether out of laziness or some breakdown in chain of command, is eventually going to be unravelled and exposed by logic and law.
It was exposed, but the fact is it was never explained. I mean, I think
and I
that's
found
the
that
thing.
to be because
Never.
after a while, this is what the essential question of the book becomes: is why did this captain not act? And I felt like that was never quite resolved. And I don't know if that was a problem of because it's historical fiction. You don't want to put words in the mouth of this dead man and make something up.
But that's what historical fiction does, surely. I mean, he's taken all the known facts and used them, and then he's just filled in these gaps, and that's what turns it into fiction as opposed to just history. I mean, so he's invented. The narrative device is that there's this journalist who's on the hunt. Now he's completely fictional, isn't he? John Stedman.
Well,
and it's
so he's a bit of a hokey character.
but it is just a device so that you can get into the
Well,
story.
it's the inquiry, because really I looked at it as it was a psychological inquiry, because we're never going to know, because that captain, to the end of his days, never explained why it was that he stayed. 8 rockets were fired, 8 distress rockets. The second mate, or the second officer, told him, Captain, there are distress flares. He never even left his cabin. He went to sleep.
But Omar's right. If you set that up as the central question of the novel, if it's not answered, there's something quite unsatisfying about that.
There is a theory.
way.
There is a theory. John Stedman, he's the voice of David Dyer in this book, he does have this theory. I mean, I found the theory sort of reasonably convincing in the way that he presents the events and the characters.
Partly the captain's character.
And partly Herbert Stone's character.
I think in terms of giving it a sense of time and place, he succeeds really well in terms of Stedman walking around the streets of the cities. You get a real sense of the smells and the feeling of the time, how the press was at the time, how the stories were being reported. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I think where the thread started to unravel for me, there are a lot of secondary, third characters, everything that went on in the boat, interesting characters, real people with real stories. There's a couple of journalists, and he does over-egg the pudding in terms of his writing. There's a journalist who's drunk. Every time he is mentioned, he's having a sip of something or he's staggering. I'm like, we get it. You mentioned that he was a drunk the first time. There's quite a few things like that where he doesn't seem to have trust what he's told you about a character the first time, and then it becomes quite repetitive. So there's a series of slightly panto characters as supporting cast, which I do think let it down a little bit.
Which is your point, isn't it? I mean, you were saying you found it repetitive.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
But one thing I did find interesting was that, in the whole Titanic story, they often talk about the class element that's at play. The rich people were saved and the poor people were kind of left there to drown or whatever, and that comes up in the book as well. But that's also at play on the Californian, because there's this kind of loyalty and adherence to class rules, or at least the structure within the ship. That means that Stone cannot necessarily act upon his moral compass in this situation, and he kind of has to defer to
this captain.
to his
Because
captain.
Because he wants to be completely loyal and he doesn't want to betray him.
And the thing is that we are speaking a lot about the facts and the history and the things that happen, and those are the things that are interesting. But then he he wallpapers over with his own kind of characters and inventions, and I think that's where the wheels start to fall off. The story itself is amazing because it's a real life story that actually happened.
Yeah, but you know what? Where the journalist is important is that he writes this account of the sinking of the Titanic, and you get that in the book. And there had to be an account of the sinking, and he does it through the lens of this family from Britain going to America. They were, going steerage, third class. There were 9 kids, I think, mother and father. They all drowned. You can look them up, and it's true. And I thought that the account of the sinking of the people, the passengers, and what happened to them was really, really good and dramatic. And the class stuff comes in extraordinarily there, doesn't it?
When you talk about the people who died on the Titanic, you generally talk about the more famous first-class passengers. So, the Guggenheims died, Ida and Isidor Straus died, John Jacob Astor died. You rarely hear stories of people in third class who died because there was no one to tell their stories and they had drowned.
We must be fun, but I thought the whole thing was remarkable. I must admit, I was completely engrossed in the story. I agree that the prose itself is pretty functional, workmanlike, as opposed to, it doesn't have flights.
It was his first book. It's not
well, that's what I said. I thought, for a debut particularly, I thought it was extraordinary.
And the research,
I loved it.
I don't think the research gets in the way of the
and I can't believe the fortune that we actually... You had invited you long before we picked this book.
I could talk about this for hours.
Please don't. Because we are moving from the Atlantic chill to something a little snugglier by the bed. What else have we been reading? We'll start with you, Rosie.
I just started reading it, an amazing book by a female writer called Lindy West. It's called Shrill, Stories from a Loud Woman. And she was started as an online writer, mainly a feminist columnist, and she's also writes a lot of comedy. Have you heard of Lindy West? Yeah. Her memoir was released, I think, last week, so I've just started it. It's brilliant, it's funny, it's brash. She talks a lot about body image. She quite famously did an episode of NPR where she talked about how she confronted a troll who pretended to be her dead father, and he ended up apologising to her and they actually ended up corresponding. And so she talks a lot about the abuse she gets as a woman online, particularly a fat woman online. And it's a really funny, gripping memoir so far. Halfway through, loving it.
I've been reading this, I just finished it, Icelandic novel called Moonstone by Sean. Which is
that cover beyond telling.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's a lovely cover. And it's a strange book. You're not quite sure. He brings together the end of the Second World War, a volcanic eruption in Reykjavik, cinema, the birth of the cinema. The main character is obsessed with films, the influenza epidemic, and then there's a sort of big surprise at the end. It's a short novel, it's very fine, I think. Very fine.
Sounds good.
Yeah. He's a great writer.
And there's a bit of sex in it as well for you, Marique.
Oh, thank you so much.
For all of us.
Just for me.
Remember the first show of the year, we were talking about whether you're a Wuthering Heights or a Jane Eyre person. Well, I grew up, it was like you're either a Rolling Stones person or a Beatles person, and I definitely love the Rolling Stones and always had. And a bit like the Titanic, you think, can there be one more thing that I don't know about?
Is that the first time the Rolling Stones have ever been compared to the Titanic? They are a bit like the Titanic. I'm not quite sure about that comparison, but I'm going to support it.
Well, it's The Sun, the Moon and the Rolling Stones by Rich Cohen. He writes brilliantly, and that's what's the difference. One, he actually travelled with them a lot, and you learn things that I'd never known, like that Mick Jagger, in fact, when he was quite young, early on in the band, got hit on a basketball court, bit his tongue, was told that he shouldn't sing that day, went off to practice, and that's when he got his distinctive voice. All sorts of rubbish, but also he is a Richards person, Keith Richards versus Mick Jagger. He is a Keith Richards person, and he makes the point that there's something monstrous about Mick Jagger, and that, in fact, in the end, he always dances in the centre of the stage. and alone. That's the kind of man he is. Full of that kind of stuff.
You're a Rolling Stones-a-rack.
Yeah, I was going to say.
What about you?
I just read the remarkable Dying, a memoir by Corey Taylor. She's a wonderful writer. She wrote Me and Mr. Booker. This is going to be the last book she ever writes. She's dying of incurable cancer, and I thought it was just the most beautiful, sparse, kind, generous, reflective book about herself, her life, her parents, the family that she's going to leave behind. And I think anyone that's going to die should read it, basically. And if you're not going to die, start thinking about it. Yeah. And that's what it makes you do. And I loved it.
Deeply brave.
Yeah,
too.
I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah.
I just started reading From Victims to Suspects, Muslim Women Since 9/11 by Dr. Shakira Hussein, who's a very erudite, formidable Muslim feminist academic. And it's really great. It kind of talks about how in the post-9/11 era, women have gone from being seen as kind of helpless victims to nefarious accomplices to spreading extremist Islam. And she kind of goes into how right-wing commentators have often co-opted feminist Muslim voices when they criticise patriarchal systems at play. And it's a very provocative read. She kind of travelled to Pakistan and refugee camps and went to Afghanistan and also, the wilds of suburban Australia to research this. And I recommend it. It's brilliant.
Is there a conclusion?
I'm only about a third of the way in, so I'll let you know next time I come home to the book club.
OK. Now on to our favourite, A Million Little Pieces by James Frey, published in 2003 as a scalding memoir of addiction and recovery, exposed 3 years later as, do we call it a hoax? Certainly untrue in crucial details. A most intriguing choice by you, Rosie.
Yes. I'm not sure if it's a favourite, but to be honest, I just sort of wanted to throw this book grenade in on my first visit and see the chat that ensued. So,
little knowing that, in fact, you'd be leading with the Titanic.
Yes, exactly. I actually read the book knowing that it had been revealed to be untrue. And I still loved the book. I loved the story. And so I was interested to know if any of you had read the book before it was revealed to be untrue and then found out. And did you feel ripped off?
I feel outraged
Really?
still. I read it, I think, probably within a month or two of publication.
Did you try and sue him like some of those other people?
No, and I didn't try and get my money back. But
Yeah.
I have developed, I'm just going to say it loud, not proud, a deep and poisonous feeling towards James Frey. And I went back to it. I tried to
Glad
be fair.
I brought this out.
Totally betrayed. I believed it. I signed on. I thought he was one of the most brilliant young writers. I was just... And then it's a damn lie.
I can't
And I'll
agree
never
with
forgive
you.
him.
I
Really?
can't agree with you there. I read it. I knew that there were bits of it that were untrue, supposedly. Well, not supposedly, untrue. But it's still an immensely powerful story about addiction.
It's
and
a made-up story.
It's not a
No, but the
made-up
fact
story.
that it rang true to so many addicts and families of addicts, doesn't that say that?
He was an addict. He was in this rehab place.
That's
the
not
bit
the
that is
only
untrue.
thing that's true
the bit,
in the
book.
The bit that is untrue is that he didn't go to prison for 3 months. And
Oh,
he didn't,
pish tosh, that is not the only
That's
bit
not
that's
the
untrue.
only bit.
all right, maybe there are a few other things.
I'm sorry.
Excuse me?
Sorry, can I just interrupt 1 second to say it's
Do
not
you
that it's
believe
not,
every memoir? Do you believe every word of every memoir
we'll
you
come
read?
to the general principle, but just on the specific, you're saying he didn't go for 3 months. It isn't just that he lied about he's actually spent 5 hours in jail. He had the pretentious presumption to say, and while I was there, I ran Don Quixote. I think it was Crime and Punishment.
That's sort of a minor detail in the book.
Yeah.
Sorry, but
What about other people who write supposedly non-fiction books but conflate characters and things like that? What do you do about that? How do you... Helen Garner,
I
for
want
example,
to read it because you know that. Because Helen Garner tells us what she does. We know that. Janet Malcolm, she tells us what she does. This guy went out there. He said in 2003, he told The Guardian, this book is honest to an extreme degree.
I've got lots of feelings about this.
OK, I'm going to be quiet now. I've had my piece.
No. I mean, I read it this is the first time I've read it, so I knew it was total horseshit when I was reading it.
Yep.
And I think if I didn't know that beforehand, I would have guessed it was total horseshit, because some of those hokey characters that he's got filling out rehab, the mafia boss with a heart of gold, the literal whore with a heart of gold who becomes his girlfriend, who, whether she existed or not.
Well,
the problem...
that's apparently that she didn't.
Of course
and
she
that's
didn't.
bothered
Of course she
people.
didn't. She's not a real person at all.
Yeah.
The only real person in it is him, and he's barely believable. And I think the problem is that this is a writer who has been through quite intense drug and alcohol addiction and quite intense drug and alcohol rehab. That must have been a harrowing journey for him, and probably would have made a really interesting book, because he can write. He's a good writer. My problem is that he then just went, that's not enough. I want to make myself look like I had the biggest dick in rehab. Anyone that looks at me, I'm going to smash him. I'm going to become friends with all the tough guys. No one's going to tell James Fry what to do. That's the whole thing is him swaggering around, swinging his penis around like a lasso.
Sister!
Okay. Oh, yes. Oh, my God, we're getting along. This is so good. Who knows
He also makes himself look pretty bad, though, too.
No,
He's
he
not
doesn't. He makes himself look like a badass.
Like, I went into it because both my parents were addicts and
We
alcoholics.
are coming to you, Emma.
I spent a lot of time in rehab centres growing up as a kid with my parents. And so I was drawn to the book because I wanted to see like what his experience was like, and parts of it did ring true for me. But at the same time, when you're in centres like that, the truth is stranger than fiction, and I don't think he needed to hokey it up the way he did.
That's what I'm saying. There would be within these pages somewhere is a really beautiful, sad, difficult, painful, harrowing story about someone who went through some intense addiction, went to rehab, probably had, as a result, a fractured relationship with his parents, people that he'd hurt along the way, all those sort of things. The fact that he needed to embellish itself and make him a poster boy who is the baddest, had the worst addiction, had the toughest friends, I just feel sad for him, you know.
Omar.
I didn't really feel like he was glamorising himself that much. I agree with you that some of the characters were a bit hokey and he definitely played it up, but I knew when I started it that it wasn't a memoir. I took it as a novel, and I thought it hung together really well as a novel as well, and I was still really moved at the end by what he'd been through, what the other people had been through, the kind of multitude of stories that came out, you know, from the other people, and how they got into addiction, how they were dealing with that or not dealing with that. And then, you know, the ultimate kind of tragic thing that happens at the end that I know probably did not happen still moved me. And I still thought it was an immense tragedy because it could have happened. Maybe it wasn't the exact facts, but it reached some kind of ecstatic truth through his lie.
I get that, and I get that. But you came to it knowing that there'd been a controversy over whether it was authentic or not. And you came to it knowing that. But can you imagine, we've heard him on all those talk shows and saying, you know, he absolutely shared the lot, and you too, you don't need the 12-step, you don't need to have a higher power, you can do this. What's the difference between that and Belle Gibson with her hokey cancer cure? You know, you can do it on your own.
Because he did go through rehab. She didn't have cancer.
Did he?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt.
No,
he went to this place called Hazelden.
Rehab.
There's no doubt. Listen, do you believe every memoir that you read? The thing about memoir, thing about memoir is that it's somebody's truth. It's not necessarily an absolute truth.
I totally agree.
George Bernard Shaw, many years ago, all autobiographies are lies. I do not mean unconscious, unintentional lies. I mean deliberate lies.
That's crazy writing.
That's my writing. But, you know, I never read a memoir and think, this is true, this is true, this is true, this is true.
No, but it has to be true in its heart. In its heart.
And
it was a concoction.
No, I think the core of the book is rehab. The core of the book is not what the smoking gun investigated, whether he'd been in jail for 5 months or 30 days or 5 hours. That's not the core of the book. The core of the book is the rehab process. I think.
Well, then why did he need all that other stuff? Why did he have to say? Why couldn't he have said, "I was in jail for 5 hours"?
Because he wanted to write Kerouac, Bukowski-style literature. And, OK, maybe he failed dismally.
And sell millions of copies.
I wrote my memoir last year and was very strict about writing things that I remembered, even if, like, my sisters came to me and even said, oh, I remember that a little differently, you should change it. And I said, no, because that's not how I remember
That's
it.
fine.
That's
and
your
so
truth.
but I would never have just made up stories completely, which is what he has done, which I don't understand why
But
not
why
to
did
sell
you
it
bring
as
it?
fiction.
Just to have a good argument.
Just to drop
She
this
wanted
book
to watch
grenade
you
in
two
to watch
absolutely
this
tear each
unfold.
other
This
apart,
is
which
fun.
we all enjoyed.
I loved the
Torn
book,
each-
though.
We're just having a friendly chat.
Yeah, friendly.
But isn't part of why you feel so betrayed the fact that the writing is really good? Because once upon a time, you thought that he was, you know, a very accomplished
right.
writer.
That's
So
exactly
I enjoyed
why.
it for that.
It's a
like, I
If
mean,
it was a crap
it's a
book,
compelling.
I wouldn't feel
Yeah.
betrayed.
Yeah, it's a compelling book, and even though I know that a lot of it is a lie, I still feel that, like, the style of it and the way he wrote it and some of the emotions that he brought out. And people, despite knowing that he made it up, still write to him apparently all the time. He maybe, you know, he's embellishing that. I don't know.
Readers.
One interesting thing I saw that I found very intriguing was when they had that interview with him on Oprah about 5 years after she had really nailed him.
Yeah.
He kind of said, look, I have to take responsibility for this. I can't blame it on the publisher. I can't blame it on the fact that, you know, I didn't get published for years and years. I made this mistake. It was my decision. I screwed up and I lied. You know, and I thought that was fascinating because he says that in the book about drugs. You know, he kind of.
Yes.
So there are obviously real parallels. He's not just completely making his own persona up. I don't think.
Well, your point, actually, that he wrote with such coherence that a whole lot of people who'd been to rehab believed him. Obviously, there is authenticity.
Yeah, otherwise he's just got the
not
most
enough.
on-point, laser-sharp imagination ever.
But he's going to be a special guest on the book club next week.
Well,
That would be interesting.
I have a treat for you all because though we didn't actually plan it this way, but as you've gathered, the two books we're focusing on tonight, the historical fiction based on truth, the other presenting as fact, but lacking, do you remember that lovely phrase Stephen Colbert used to use? Truthiness. Substantially without truthiness. It's inspired tonight's The Last Word, and it is another quiz. Another quiz. We have 3 questions around the theme real or imagined.
Yeah.
We have 2 teams, Marique and Omar.
Oh, we're stuffed.
Jason and Rosie. I've tried to make them a little
We're the
harder.
anoraks.
Useless at this.
Yeah.
Okay. And Marique,
Yes.
what was it that you wanted when we had the last quiz?
No quizzes?
No?
Oh,
Next
no,
2 quizzes?
No, that's it. I can't remember. What did I say? A gin? Oh, a buzzer.
Squeaky toes!
We are turning into It's a Knockout, and I don't know if I'm happy with that. We're all going to be...
You can
Okay.
I'm the pig.
Okay.
You got it.
Quick quiz is a good quiz.
Confirm.
Can you hear that?
One. One.
This is the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
One. These are very intelligent.
Yeah.
I know
mystery
my
questions.
mates are going to
Come on.
screenshot
Together.
this all over Twitter.
What famous hoax of modernism included the line, the black swan of trespass?
Yeah, we know it.
Very good. Very good. Number 2. Which author fabricated her autobiography, Forbidden Love?
No, I don't know.
You don't. You just
wanted
wanted
to
to
squeeze
squeeze
it
the
on.
chicken, didn't you? Okay, here's a clue. It was an international bestseller in 2003, same year as James Phony Fry. It involved a young woman who owned a unisex hairdressing salon in Jordan.
Malcolm Knox wrote the story about her.
No bonus point there.
Begins with a K, her surname.
Yes, it does. And ends with an I.
Nora Curry.
Norma
Norma
Curry.
Curry, yeah.
Norma Curry. Close enough. That's good.
That deserves a clap, I reckon.
I knew
That's a very distasteful speaker.
I think that's a really good one.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Number 3, final
Helen
one.
Demidenko.
Have a reverse one. Who danced in a Ukrainian folk dress? No.
Oh.
What was the name of the autobiography faked in 1971 about an eccentric billionaire?
Howard Hughes
Yeah, it
is
was
the billionaire.
Howard Hughes's...
And it was written by... he lived in Ibiza, that bloke. Can't remember the title.
No, the bonus point
I
is...
just know it was
This is
about
the
Howard
worst
Hughes.
quiz
I don't know
ever.
who. I don't
It
know
was
who.
It was
definitely...
the autobiography of Howard Hughes.
Yes.
Written by Clifford Irving. And for a bonus point, the name of his follow-up book.
A Million Little Pieces.
Or something similar. It's The Hoax. Congratulations.
Oh, no.
You get to take a book.
Oh.
You get your pick, but we won't do
How
it
many
exactly
books
now.
we
We'll
have to
go
read
through.
already?
I think he actually wants to keep the pig.
Yeah.
I want a pig. I want a pig, yes.
But what happens with the
Oh,
next
and
quiz?
a bald chicken. My dog loves bald chickens.
That sounds like a euphemism.
Oh, the wheels have fallen off the book show, really.
10 years and you finally got what you wanted, Dave.
All chicken.
Time to go, and won't you join me in saying a warm thanks to tonight's quarrelsome book club. Rosie, Jason, Marie and Omar. Now, next week, I was going to say, tune in for the most controversial book club ever, but I think we may have just had one. Certainly the most quarrelsome. But we have sex, religion and politics on the table. Our panellists will need to bring their A game, because they are Christos Chalkis, Amelia Lester, Zoe Norton-Lodge and Jeff Cousins. The subject is books that divide a dinner party. I think I might bring it along and divide us a bit.
You know which one to bring.
Absolutely.
Are you going to give them a quiz as well?
I might.
Only makes us do that.
Anyway, it's one not to be missed. I do hope you'll join us then. And until then, thank you for your company. Happy reading and good night.